Now, the first thing you want to do when you're preparing for a showcase is you want to make sure you're logged into College Fit Finder. I'll show you a couple reasons why you want to be logged into College Fit Finder. The main reason is it's going to make things a lot easier, basically make things a lot easier on you when you're going through and doing research and trying to reach out to coaches. So I'm just going to go to collegefitfinder.com, log into my account. Now, the first thing that you want to do is you want to go in and you want to actually print out some of your profile. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the profile tab here. And again, this one is just more of a suggestion, but what I do suggest is that you print out a bunch of copies of your player profile and you have those on you in your bag when you go to an event. The reason why you should do this is maybe you walk by a coach that you've been having a hard time getting a hold of. All of a sudden you see that coach and you can say, hey coach, and hand them a player profile. Or maybe one of the coaches that you invited just doesn't have a copy of your player profile on you and they want it. It's going to look good on you if you have that in your bag and you're able to hand that to them. So all I have to do is click on that profile tab, click print. It's going to download a PDF. Now you're able to pull up that one-page sheet of your player profile. All I have to do is click print here. Again, I would take about 10 or 15 copies, put those in your bag with you. The other thing with everything going on, if a coach doesn't actually want to take the paper from you, they can scan that QR code on their phone and it'll automatically pull up your player profile on their phone. So regardless of whether they want to take the paper or they don't, you should have that with you. That way the coach can have all of that information on hand. So once you're done with that, I'm just going to click on this logo and then I'm going to go into my colleges tab. Now, the other thing that you want to have pulled up is you want to have pulled up the coaches list from the showcase. Now, for me, these lists are very frustrating because if you notice just by looking at them, they all kind of look the same. They're all going to have the information of the school, the coach's information, but the biggest thing that's missing here is their contact information. So if I don't have something like College Fit Finder, this could be very difficult. And I know, like, when I used to play a long time ago, this was very frustrating for me to kind of go through this whole list, try to contact these coaches, go look for their contact information. So if I have College Fit Finder already pulled up, and let's just say I want to go contact this coach, all I have to do is just go in here, type in the name of the school. Now it's going to filter to show me the school. Now if I click on the card, it will give me the coach's contact information right here. So I can either click on it, copy and paste it, and send this guy an email and then start talking about the showcase and things like that. But it's really important that I don't just email that head coach. Obviously, it's going to tell you who is going. So, for example, you may see an assistant coach going on some of these situations. But if there is an assistant coach going, my suggestion is that you copy the head coach as well. Even if the head coach might not be going, maybe that head coach is in charge of recruiting as well, and they see that email and they see your information in your player profile. So it can't hurt to copy the head coach or any other coaches, even if it says that they're not going. When you're addressing the coach, you should address the coach that is attending the showcase. Now, once I go back here, first thing I'm going to do is I would just copy and paste this, or I can just click on it and it'll pull up in my computer to send that email. The other thing I would do is I would just click on this symbol here. This allows you to go to their website. So I can go to their academic website just by clicking on that. And again, the symbol is just right here, the little cup. Now what I can do is I can just go to the teams tab, go down to soccer, click on roster real quick. And then I can just click on coaching staff to be able to get any other coaches that either, I want to copy and paste. I want to see any other coaches that might be going. This just allows you to kind of go and see their whole coaching staff. The other thing that you can do is if you really want to attend this school, maybe this school is one of your top 10 schools, you can actually go in and fill out a recruiting questionnaire as well. So you can take the time as well to fill out that recruiting questionnaire. And the reason why I suggested, especially before you're going to a showcase, is because if I'm going in and I'm reaching out to a coach to say, hey, come watch me play, and then later that day or maybe earlier that day, they've received an email from their own email that says, this player has filled out your men's soccer recruiting form. Basically, it's going to let the coach know that you're serious about going to their school. Sometimes when coaches receive an email from a coach or from a player, they're not sure if the player just wants them to go and watch the game or if the player is really interested in going to their school. So the more clear that I can make it to the coach that I'm interested in their school, the more successful that you're going to be. So if I go on here and I'm looking for the coach anyway, I can click on more links, click on recruiting form, and fill it out. Again, if you're not quite sure if you want to go to that school, I wouldn't even really reach out to them to tell them to come watch you play because, again, you don't want to waste any of these coaches' time if you're not sure if you want to go to their school. Now, when you're emailing the coach, a lot of the time the coaches list will come out a couple weeks before the showcase, sometimes a month before. You need to make sure that you're emailing these coaches 2 to 3 weeks before the showcase. Any closer than that, so let's just say you're like, I'm going to email the week of the showcase. Most coaches will make their schedules a week, 2 weeks in advance, and they'll already have their list of players that they're going to watch before they're even leaving to go to the showcase. So if I email, a couple days before or that week, you might not get on that list. So it's important that I'm emailing 2 to 3 weeks out, so that way I'm making sure I'm getting on that recruiting list for them to come watch me play. Now, the other thing is a lot of people will email because that's the easiest thing to do, and also you may feel more comfortable doing that. But my suggestion is if I've already gone through the process of emailing the coach, reaching out to the coach, or filling out the recruiting questionnaire, now it might be time to pick up the phone and give them a call. Especially when you're asking them to come watch you play at a showcase, this can be a very good time for you to pick up the phone because all I would have to say is, hey, coach, I just wanted to reach out. I know we're not going to have any time to talk at the showcase, so I just wanted to make sure you got my email, see if you're able to go to those games, and then maybe I can even get into a conversation with the coach as well. So if I kind of reach out with the pretense of, hey, coach, I just wanted to talk before the showcase to make sure you got my email, this can allow you to have a really good conversation leading up to the showcase, which, again, will make it more likely for them to come watch you play. The other thing is when you do email the coach, it's very important that you're adding your player profile link in there. You're also putting your schedule to your games to make sure they have all that information directly on the email. Also, the other thing is a lot of people will put a link to their games. A lot of coaches will actually copy and paste sometimes the schedule from that email. So to make it easier on them, it is easier instead of just putting the link in to actually put your just game schedule. So if they wanted to, they can copy and paste it directly from your email. Again, we're just trying to make things as easy as possible on the coaches. So that way it's more likely for them to come watch you play. The other thing is a lot of the time, this is more for after the showcase, but it's really important to keep track of who attended your games. Most teams will do this, but if your team manager or your team is not doing this, it's important that you have a family member, a friend that's going to your games. Keep track of those coaches because what you want to do after the showcase is you want to follow up and thank them for coming. A lot of players do not do this. A lot of players will invite coaches out. They'll send 100 emails at the beginning of the showcase, and then the showcase happens, and that's it. So it's really important that you are following up after. And if I have that list of coaches that attended, I could reach out and say, hey, coach, I just wanted to reach out. I want to thank you for going to my game. I wanted to see what you thought, if you had any feedback. And again, this can get you into another conversation. The whole point of them coming to watch you play, obviously besides trying to recruit you, is to start conversations. This process is a lot to do with relationships, conversations, going back and forth with college coaches. It's going to be hard to get recruited if they come and watch you play at one game in a showcase and that's it. So if I'm continually finding these opportunities, whether it be at the beginning of the showcase, the end of the showcase, to try to hop on the phone and have a conversation, you are going to be more likely that you are going to be successful, especially when they come and watch you play. It just builds a little bit of rapport, and that way, if you have a really good conversation, maybe that coach wasn't going to come watch you play, and all of a sudden they decide, you know what, I like that player. I'm going to go ahead and see what this player is all about. So really important that you are reaching out to these coaches. You're not just talking about the showcase, but you're also talking about, hey, coach, I really want to go to your school. This shouldn't be the first time that you've reached out to a coach if you're reaching out to them. So, for example, I should have kind of introduced myself before the showcase, because if I'm only reaching out to coaches to say, hey, coach, come watch me play at the showcase, again, it's hard for them to determine, do you want to go to their school or do you just want a coach to come watch you play? Make it clear to them in your correspondence that not only do you want them to come watch you play, but you are very interested in their school because of these reasons. And again, feel free to list those, whether it's they have your major, you knew people that played in their program before. Really important to put all of these things in that correspondence. Now, that's pretty much it for me when we're talking about just prepping for a showcase. I do want to leave the majority of the time talking about the testing and COVID and things like that. So if you do have questions about just some of the things that I talked about, feel free to type those questions in. But right now, I am going to turn it over to Sawyer and Jess. I'm just going to make them the presenter real quick. And they are going to be talking about the future of testing.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Jeff, for introducing us. We are going to switch over to our own presentation, but we did want to show you that we are live. We're here in person. We are real people. And we're going to go ahead and switch over to share screen so that you can see our presentation, and we can talk a little bit about who we are, what we do, how we do it, and all that good stuff. Let me know if y'all can see the screen in I guess the chat or the question and answer.
Yes, we can.
Whatever you'd like. Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Well, so we talked about prepping for a showcase, and now we're going to talk about the future of standardized testing. Specifically, we're going to focus a little bit on post-COVID, because right now we had kind of early COVID. I guess if this was a timeline, we're in middling COVID, hopefully getting towards the end of COVID. And we want to talk about the big changes that have happened over the past year or so with testing, because there have been quite a few. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Sawyer. I am one of the co-founders of Virtual College Counselors. Professionally, I worked in admissions. So I worked for a small liberal arts college in Arkansas, Hendrix College, a Division III school, a really great opportunity for student athletes if you're interested in that. And I spent about a little over 4 years doing that. I worked and headed up our international recruitment. I recruited states from Washington State, followed the coastline all the way up to North Carolina. So about 23 different states, and worked a lot with first generation students. And I am a first generation student myself. Aside from that, I grew up in South Alabama. I've lived in kind of the South most of my life, just moved out to Colorado just in time to get snowed in over the past week or so. So that was an interesting experience for someone who's always grown up on the beach. Jess, I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jess. My background is a little bit different. I am a licensed professional counselor. I studied forensic psychology in graduate school and wasn't as interested in court-mandated therapy, it turns out. I also spent a couple of years as an operations research analyst for the Army, and I think my entire professional trajectory has just been a really strong indicator that it really doesn't matter where you go or what you study. What matters is who you meet and what you do there. So we can focus on that a little later, but I've been doing the college counseling thing for about 10 years, officially running a business myself for 4 years, and then Sawyer and I have been doing this together for about a year. And we bring very unique perspectives to the table, and
and then a preface for us, 2 things. We are relatively low key. We are taking our job pretty seriously in the sense that we basically live, eat, breathe college admissions in all its various forms. But we also value honesty, transparency, and authenticity. It's why we put it in our logo. So what you see here, what you hear here, is exactly what you're going to see or hear if we were not giving a webinar. We don't really put on the professional masks. We decided when we started our own company that there's enough of that in college admissions and other parts of the world and office jobs that we've worked in the past, and that was not who we wanted to be. So we take that pretty seriously in the sense that we laugh, we're kind of goofy, we're both nerds, we're just who we are. The second thing is I'm going to echo what Jess said and what Jeff said. Put your questions in the Q&A as we go along. We'll answer them along the way, either out loud or in text format. But the last presentation we did with Jeff was fantastic attendance, fantastic involvement. We just had so many great questions coming out. So I would like to see that same thing again. I lay down the gauntlet to you to pick it up and have an equally great interactive experience. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to go over quite a few things today, and this is something we do just in general with students and with webinars, as we like to talk about learning objectives. So really brief, surface level, kind of macro level, what are we going to talk about? So we start off with common terminology because we are going to use a lot of acronyms throughout this, and we really want to make sure that you are understanding what we're talking about. The world of college admissions and college counseling can sometimes become like an alphabet soup almost, and so we really want to avoid getting lost in that. We're going to talk a little bit about what are standardized tests, mainly focusing on kind of the ACT and SAT. Then we're going to talk about how they're used in admissions, so I'm going to chime in and talk a lot about What is an admission counselor thinking about as they go through the admission process? What's important, and also where do tests factor into that? Talk a little bit about the ACT versus the SAT. Depending on where you are in the country, there tends to be one of the more popular. Lastly, going into test optional versus test blind, because those are two big trends that are happening now with COVID. Kind of tying all of it together with a case study that we put together to show a lot of this in action, kind of put that into practice. And then lastly, just talk a little bit about what is the future of testing. So what is it going to look like post-COVID in theory? Something important to remember, we'll add an asterisk onto what we say, which is the idea that education, college admissions is very fluid. It's very dynamic. It changes very rapidly. Just look at the wild difference that happened in just a couple months to a year since COVID started. It's pretty dramatic for people who have been doing this for a long time, and education tends to be a very slow and bureaucratic process. So it's pretty remarkable how quickly it's changing. Looking at the common terms, we're just going to go through some of them. Most of you probably have heard these before, but we want to make sure everybody's on the same starting ground. So we've got the ACT, which is one of the two standardized tests most commonly used in American college admissions.
To be clear, we also had to look up what ACT actually stood for. So please recognize we're humans and you are not alone in not actually knowing what these acronyms stand for.
Yeah. Also, to be quite honest, no one will ever care what it stands for.
Nope.
I do it professionally and I'd never even heard ACT broken down. We had to Google it. SAT, same thing. One of the standardized tests. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between the two. Test optional is something we'll say quite a bit. Test optional in a nutshell is essentially that a college allows a student when applying to submit a standardized test or to not submit a standardized test. So in theory, you have the option of submitting a test. Test blind is a little bit different. Test blind is a little bit more rare, but it essentially means that if you submit an application, you will not submit a test score, period. And if you do, they will not review it. They will not look at it. So the idea is that this is the ultimate kind of equalizer in the playing field, is removing the test score completely. Talk about super scoring. Some of you might have heard about this or not. Essentially, if you take multiple ACTs or multiple SATs, they will take the strongest subsection scores, compile them together, and give you what's called a super score. So the idea is if you did really great on, science section in June, and then you did really great on English in July, you actually will take the best subscore from either of those. We'll talk about this later, along with the rest of the terms. Talk about NACAC a lot, which is the National Association for College Admission Counseling. It's the guiding body. And then lastly, the term middle 50%. This is quite popular in admissions. If you're looking at kind of any of the college propaganda you're going to get in the mail that are those view books or talking about academics, they're either going to say average, which most people are pretty comfortable with, or middle 50%, which is that 50% that lies between the 75% and the 25%. So it's a broader range than the average.
So ACT versus SAT. We get the question quite often, which one should I take? And the answer is, it depends, which is typically our answer for most things in this world. There are different tests, and usually students test better on one or the other. If they're particularly strong test takers, they'll likely test well on both. I myself am not a great test taker. I had to work really hard to get the score that I was looking for. And I performed a lot better on the ACT versus the SAT. So the ACT is a score out of 36, and there's 5 subsections. So as it's listed, English, math, science, writing, and reading. You typically have 3 hours, 35 minutes to take it. Each section is timed, and they don't release students early. They're not allowed to. So don't bother asking when you're taking the test. They're also talking about possibly doing something called section retesting. Basically, they might, and I mean, they agreed that this was going to happen last fall, and then COVID hit, and then they postponed it. It's really unclear what the plan actually is, but in theory, in the next year or two, students will be able to sit for a single section of the test once they've completed the test in full. So there'll be an additional fee. The subsection retesting will likely be virtual, meaning you have to go to a testing center, which are few and far between. And it's a little bit complicated. It's also unclear at this point in time how colleges might view a section retest, because obviously if you were just to sit down and study a particular area like math or science, you will likely score better in that particular area. So in theory, students could just take the test to say they took it and then retest every single subsection, which ethically is questionable. So this is something that's super new to everyone and doesn't actually exist yet, but this is what's coming. So definitely keep your eye out with that opportunity. The SAT is currently out of 1600. It was out of 1600. It went to 2400. It's back to 1600. There used to be an essay. The last sitting for the SAT with essay will be in June. If you're already registered for it, you do not actually have to sit and take the essay, but they won't let you cancel it immediately. So what you have to do is when you go to the testing site, you will say, I do not want to take the essay, and they should release you prior to the essay sitting. There were only two, before COVID, there were still only 2 colleges in the country that required the essay. They don't anymore. So that's always nice. So like we said, SAT's out of 1600. There's 2 sections. Each one's worth 800. There's the math section and then evidence-based reading and writing. When you do get your SAT score, you'll see a breakdown similar to the ACT. The difference is on the ACT, you will know what section you're about to take by the look of the section, whereas the SAT incorporates that science, reading, math, and English throughout these 2 sections. So it's not a straight like, okay, we're going science-minded here. Usually there'll be like a piece of writing where you have to do some analyzing of a graph or something like that. The SAT is 3 hours and is run by College Board. ACT is run by act.org, which easy to remember. There's a few other things that are like nuanced about some of these tests that might be worth noting. You're allowed calculators on some sections for some tests, unless you have other accommodations through a 504 or IEP. If you have accommodations in school, you can get accommodations to sit for these standardized tests, but they are actually not guaranteed and it is a pain to do. So start early. If you are a freshman and you already have a 504 and IEP, you need to start applying now to get that accommodation approved by ACT and SAT. So when your time to take it rolls around, it's already on the record. I can't tell you the number of times we've had students who even 6 weeks in advance can't actually get the accommodations they need. If you have further questions about that, you can absolutely reach out directly. I think that's it for this. Okay, the difference between test optional and test blind. Sawyer has already kind of briefly touched on some of this stuff, but test optional policies are not new. Bowdoin went test optional in 1969. So when I say they're not new, I mean it. There are many, many schools that were test optional before COVID. The difference is now they were kind of forced into test optional, which means test optional doesn't mean the same thing at every university. This can be highly problematic, but we will touch on a lot of the nuanced areas in this area as well. So there were already over 900 schools, I believe, that were test optional. You can find out which schools are test optional currently, are test optional particularly for COVID for this year, the ones that are test optional for next year too, possibly the year after. There are lists everywhere. Fairtest.org is the place to go to find that out. We can always send it in the chat or you can follow up. So basically it implies that a student can submit a score if they want to, if they have them. A lot of students are still not able to take the SAT and ACT. It's important to know that so early action deadlines tend to be a little bit earlier, typically between October 15th and November 1st. So we like students to be done testing by then, but because of everything that's going on, students can actually take these tests well through the fall of their senior year. Even if their application was already due, they can indicate that they're taking the test. There's definitely a little bit more leeway these days at most institutions about this. We also still have students that actually are seniors, already have their offers of admission, and actually just took the ACT a couple of weeks ago so that they could get more scholarship money. We'll get into the nuances there as well, but there are still a lot of shutdowns. There's a lot of areas that it's impossible to register for. We don't want students traveling super far to take these tests, not worth it. We don't want them risking their health or safety for taking these tests, again, not worth it. So please don't go anywhere where you need a hotel room the night before to take these tests. In theory, test optional policies should allow for a more holistic review in admissions. This is true for some schools and not true for others. We will be able to link you guys to NACAC, which we've briefly mentioned, the National Association of College Admission Counseling. They wrote a petition that thousands of schools have signed. And by virtue of signing this petition, it basically said, when we say test optional, we mean test optional. The ones who have agreed to this, those are the schools that when you apply test optional, you know that you are being looked at holistically on the same level as those who are submitting those test scores. Why is this important? Because there are still some schools in this country that are saying they're test optional, and 50% or more of their applicants were test optional, and yet only 7% of their applicants who were test optional were admitted, versus much higher admit rates for those with test scores. We have some flexibility with these test optional policies. So if you do score within that middle 50% range of a school, it's likely that you would want to submit. You would definitely want to submit if you're in that upper 25%. When you don't want to submit is when your score is actually below that. We've had many students successfully be admitted to really impressive colleges without test scores because their scores were not reflective of their ability and they didn't really align with the rest of their application. It has served a lot of students very well. We have also found that a lot of students who are really good test takers are having a much harder time getting into the selective universities because there's a lot more to admissions than the test score, which we've been saying for years, but people are just now starting to believe us. Withholding your test score should not negatively impact a student's application. High test scores can certainly help get a student into college. It's very nuanced. It depends on the school. There's a lot that goes into making that decision, but if you ever are wondering if you should submit or not submit, again, please just reach out and ask. Test blind, on the other hand, is what we're looking for. This is what we are desperately hoping the world goes to soon. The UCs, University of California schools, have already committed to being test blind, which means you cannot actually submit a test score. In all likelihood, if you try to submit a test score, that actually would reflect negatively on you. So don't do that. If the school says they're test blind and you can't submit a score, don't try to sneak the score into the additional information section. They want to see that students know how to follow instruction. Test blind policies, again, mean that no student will have a test score. Everyone is on an even playing field. The implication is obviously that everyone is viewed evenly, but also that schools are starting to value other pieces of the application more than the test score. It's really hard to unsee a test score when you're in admissions, when you're reading dozens of applications a day, thousands over the course of a couple of years. But now without tests, these test blind policies have allowed for, really trying to actually get to know the student more than just them in this one particular sitting on a Saturday for a 3-hour period. For test blind schools, if there is a section to list honors, students can technically still include if they were a national merit finalist or semifinalist or commended. Again, it's kind of nuanced. I'm not saying that we're recommending doing this. I'm saying that there have been discussions in the field about the ability to somehow still reflect and provide information about how well you've done on these tests without having to submit that score. But that's pretty much it for those.
Good summary of tests. Hopping around. All right. So now we get to hop into the fun part. All right. We're going to go on a journey. We are going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be in an admission office and how can we view these standardized tests. Now, I'm going to once again add a caveat here. Most of my experience is with small liberal arts schools, both from my own professional work experience and from the experience of all of my colleagues that I stay in contact with. That's one thing that's really nice about having worked in college, is that I tend to be able to continue to reach out to those colleagues and have those kind of off the record conversations about what's going on inside the office or on the college side. So here we've got a pretty simple graphic that I made. I'm very proud of it. And we're going to look at 3 students applying to college. And so we have student 1, which has an ACT and an SAT, student 2, which has only an ACT, and student 3 that has no test scores. So they're applying to generic college in the center. A question often comes up with families, you know, who has the advantage, right? Who has the best opportunity when we talk about these testing strategies? So if we're thinking about the first one, test required, this is something that was pretty standardized in the past. So this is why we all think we need an ACT or an SAT, because most schools in the past did require them. So naturally, if a school requires a test, the people who have the test are going to be able to take advantage of that. Our student with no test is actually not even going to be able to complete an application. Now, it does not matter why he can't take the test. He could be in a rural part of the country where it's not offered. There could be a COVID pandemic happening. He could be struggling and on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. The colleges in the past would not care. He was not allowed to apply. So then we move on to this new one that we're very excited about that's becoming a lot more popular, which is test blind, in which case student 1, 2, and 3, none of them submit their test scores, and they are reviewed on their merits over the past 4 years. So we're thinking about GPAs, transcripts, the rigor of courses, thinking about extracurriculars, both in school and outside of school, right? Were you on a soccer team? Did you do a soccer team that was a club team or a school team? Did you participate in the student government at your school, or did you work a job afterwards? Did you have to take care of family or family friends? These are all really important things. So when we think about test blind, that's really kind of the beauty of it, is that you can strip away this single day that really statistically does not tell much about how a student is going to do in and after college. And everybody's viewed on a more equitable playing field, and we can see how they've performed over several years rather than that one day. Now we get to the problematic part, right? Test optional. Who has the advantage? Well, in theory, all students are going to be treated equal if we're thinking about test optional in the ethical sense. So schools that have pretty openly come out and said, hey, test optional, test, no test, everybody's going to be viewed the same. The institution that I worked at was Hendrix College. It was test optional. We adopted it about a year before the pandemic actually started. And this was something that we took very seriously. And for the most part, we actually didn't even see if a student had a test when they submitted test optional. So even if they had taken one, we couldn't see it. And we reviewed them on all of these other great things. Now, it's kind of hard because not every single school is totally being honest and ethical with their test optional policies. So there is a chance that perhaps student 1, 2, and 3 apply to a test optional school, and the test optional school might emphasize student 1 or 2 because they can see those test scores, even though they're not supposed to take them into consideration. Alternatively, although this doesn't happen quite as much, student 3 could actually get preferential treatment because maybe they're trying to reach a certain percentage threshold of test optional admitted students. We just don't know. It's one of the frustrating parts of college and the American education in general is that it tends to be very, very opaque. There are a lot of black boxes. Information goes in, responses come out, and it's really hard to see what's going on inside of there. And that's why it's important to have these connections and stay in touch with the field, which is why we spend so much time doing this. So this is a really basic idea of kind of how are the standardized tests used in admissions. And what I really want to emphasize here to answer this question is the idea of holistic admissions, the holistic review. And what that means, if a school is being legitimate and truthful about holistic admissions, is that they are going to look at every piece of your student's application. So we're thinking about those test scores, if applicable, but more importantly, vastly more important, is the GPA and the rigor of courses over 4 years. So as an admission counselor, I'm going to get an academic transcript. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at that overall GPA. So how great is it? What scale is it? Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what kind of courses are being taken. Are you taking standardized courses, What about advanced or honors? Are you taking AP? What about IB? What about dual enrollment with a local college? All of these things, because we are looking at which students are pushing themselves to take those courses and displaying that kind of intellectual curiosity and rigor. And then the last thing I'm going to do, once I've looked at that GPA and I've looked at what kind of courses they're taking, I'm going to actually break down each year and each subject. So let's say a student really struggles in math. Do they struggle all 4 years in math? Do they get a little bit better? Is that what's pulling down their GPA, but they're getting A pluses in every other subject? Or a more common story, did a student really struggle in their freshman or sophomore year? It hurt their GPA pretty bad, but did we see them recover, right? We call these grade trends. The idea is either you want a really strong flat grade trend at the top with those 4.0s, those A's, or if you did have a little bit of a stumble, we want to see that rising grade trend. We want to see you kind of like a phoenix coming out of the ashes of that year of defeat and really kind of making a difference and showing that you really care and you've matured. What we don't want to see is a bunch of up and downs, because that makes students unpredictable. And unpredictable students can be not really super desirable for colleges, because colleges are looking for students that will come to their school, get great grades, stay there all 4 years, and graduate. If any kind of wrench gets thrown in the machine at that point, it's really damaging for a college and for a student and their family, to be quite honest. So thinking about that, outside of that, like I said, extracurriculars are very important. The essays are very important. Essays allow us to see into a student's personality, into their life, into their thought process, things that you really can't convey unless you either meet your admission counselor in person, or you can't really show that in a transcript. You can't tell me about how you're passionate about theater because it allows you to break out of your introverted mask that you wear and become somebody else on stage. You can't see that on an extracurricular list. You can't see that on a transcript. It has to be written out for an admission counselor to read. So we're thinking about all of those things when we talk about holistic applications. Moving on to kind of the next, there we go. The next piece of the puzzle. This is kind of our student application case study, and this is a very dense slide, so bear with me, kind of soak it all up for a second. We've got the University of the Mountains, which, as you can see, is a fictional university, and at the University of the Mountains, they have a middle 50%, which is that term we were talking about earlier. So they are looking for students that are a 3.52 to 4.0 on the GPA scale. You're looking for a 26 to a 32 on ACT. And they're looking for an 1170 to 1370 on the SAT. And so this is the middle 50%. What that means is that we're going to have 25% of our students that are admitted below that, and 25% of our students admitted above that. I would often talk to students and they would think that just because they had a GPA of a 3.4 or an ACT of a 25, there's no way they could get into the University of the Mountains. That is not true. There are 25% of the incoming class that is beneath that middle 50%. So then if we jump down, we have student 1, 2, and 3 here again. We have their middle 50% laid out on this nice little line graph, the yellow being the middle 50%. And we have our students color-coded where they're ending up on all of this. So if we're looking at student 1, we've got a classic case of someone who has worked really hard over the past 4 years, and they are not a solid test taker. So as an admission counselor, I'm going to see a GPA of 3.9. Awesome. We love to see that. Curriculum, AP, IB, dual enrollment, really tough courses. So for them to get a good GPA, that's pretty remarkable. Test score, not the best. Not horrible, but not the best. This is a student that would really benefit from test optional and or test blind admissions, because they've shown that they have the academic rigor, they have the work ethic, they have 4 years of commitment to their academic growth, but the test score is not going to be the strongest part of them. So that's a student that we really want to see take advantage of that test blind or that test optional. We're going to hop over to student 2. Student 2 has a GPA of 3.2. Once again, not horrible, but it's quite a bit below the middle 50%. Test scores, though, wow, really awesome. Knocked out of the park. We got a 29, which is on the higher end, and a 1340, which is on the higher end of that middle 50%. Their curriculum's standard, so it's not terrible. We'd have to look into what the school offers, But what we're seeing here is we're seeing perhaps a student that did really well on tests, not so good in the classroom. This is a student that submitting a test score would be a really advantageous thing to do. The reason being is if she doesn't submit a test score, then what we're going to see is a lower GPA and a lower curriculum, which means that we're going to see that student as a generally lower ranked student among that middle 50%. There might be some extracurriculars, there might be some essays that really help them, but if we're just looking at academics right now, then they're going to be kind of on that lower end. That test score can kind of show them that they have academic potential, that they have kind of that intellectual power within them, where perhaps given the right opportunity, given the right environment, they could succeed in the classroom. And now we're going to hop over to student number 3. So student number 3 is a GPA of 3.6, great, right in the middle. Test score of 26 and 1240, great, we're right there on the middle 50%, and a curriculum of advanced courses and honors. This student is kind of the Goldilocks of the 3, as you've noticed. We have the high GPA, the high test scores, and then student number 3 is the Goldilocks. Now, student number 3, truthfully, could benefit from test optional submitting the test or not. They do have that curriculum, which gives them a little bit of boost over student 2, and their test score is better than student 1. So really, they're going to be that student that would truthfully probably be worth submitting a test. Unless they felt very conscious about it or self-conscious about it, or if they just really didn't feel strongly about other pieces of their application. It's a little bit more flexible, but those are kind of the 3 students that we see pretty often when we talk about admissions. Each one of these, we could have a whole nother hour conversation about what do admission officers view them as, but I don't think anybody wants to hear that, at least right now. We want to keep pretty on track and keep this to a reasonable amount of time. I know most people are zoomed out.
So the future of testing. This is obviously a question that everyone's asking, including us, including people in admissions. This is a huge question and we don't have all the answers, but we have some insight. The UCs currently are permanently test blind. There's been a lot of back and forth. The most recent update is permanently test blind. It's a long-standing court case because there's a lot of evidence that these tests are inequitable. And the UCs really care about that.
What are the UCs?
Sorry, University of California schools. They kind of set the precedent for the rest of the country in terms of like how swiftly things switched to test optional for most schools. It's because of them that it moves so fast. So they've been in this long-standing court case for years. It's been a very long time. And there's been a lot of back and forth in Supreme Courts, and I won't get into the details, but they were planning to be test blind at a certain point anyway. And then this was kind of the push to make it happen a lot faster. At one point, they were test optional. All you need to know is you can't submit test scores to the University of California schools. Because of this, UCLA wound up with 140,000 applicants this year. Unclear at this point yet, because admission results have not come out, how many of those applicants were truly quote unquote qualified. But that's a huge surge, and that makes it a lot harder for in-state students to get into the California state schools. What I will say is test optional policies are not going away. They were here for decades and they're not going anywhere. We will likely see more growth. Daily, there are updates with schools going test optional and test blind. At the moment, there's about 75% of colleges in the country have reported that next year will be test optional as well for the class of 2022. And many have also said for the class of 2023, they'll be test optional.
I will also chime in here really quick. So when I worked at Hendrix College, Hendrix is part of a group called the Colleges That Change Lives, specifically 40 of them. There's a book written about them, really great institutions. The reason I bring it up is when I started working at Hendrix, 4 years ago or so, when I started my first year there, we would have counselor breakfasts where we would meet with local college counselors, guidance counselors, whatever they might be called in your particular high school. And we would talk about what our schools had to offer. When I first started, there might have been maybe 5 of the 40 that were test optional. 4.5 years later, 37 to 38 of the schools were test optional. So, and that was before the pandemic happened. Test optional, to reemphasize Jess's point, is not going away. It's going to be a part of the college admission process going forward.
Yeah. We also just wanted to point out that we're obviously talking about the ACT and SAT a lot, but there are other standardized tests, including the AP tests and IB tests and all of that. There are no more SAT subject tests. Schools can't require them. You can't take them. You can't sign up for them. So no worries there. But AP testing, IB hasn't really given much information yet about what that's going to look like this year. AP has let us know how it's going to look, and it's not looking great. If you have the opportunity to safely take these tests in person, please do. The virtual version this time around is going to be a lot tougher than this time last year during the pandemic, when the test was only 45 minutes and it was 2 questions and any number of things. Now it's going to be a lot tougher. They supposedly are putting systems in place so if the internet cuts out or anything, it should still save results and it shouldn't impact a student negatively. But they also haven't been able to test this on a large scale. One of the other major issues that we see with it, that there have been a lot of fights and it doesn't seem like anything's actually going to change. Students in other countries are going to be testing at very strange hours. This is all based on the continental US. And even then, there's students who are going to be taking the test at kind of odd hours. But there will be students in Asia taking this test at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning. It's not an even playing field. Those of us in the US happen to have an advantage here, Canada too. But there are clearly problems with the whole system. We're still encouraging students to try to test when possible. But again, your health comes first. Do not risk your health. And that means if it's detrimental to have to wake up at an absurd hour of the night to take an exam, just don't do it. It's not worth the college credit, I promise. The other thing about the future of testing, and this has been going on for years, they've been talking about it. It actually was all supposed to happen this year, and then COVID hit. But we're likely to see online versions of these exams. The graduate record exam for graduate school, which is basically the SAT for graduate school, has already been online, and you have to go to a testing center, and it's a whole shebang. And that's kind of what they're saying the next version of these tests might be. Unclear when it will actually wind up happening right now, but I anticipate that some of the freshmen in high school right now might actually have the opportunity to take this test virtually.
Advice.
Yeah.
So a couple things that are worth having advice, or things that we generally tell students or families to keep an eye on. Keep an eye on registration deadlines for exams. We had a question in the chat earlier, which we appreciated, talking about the difficulty that a lot of students and families are coming to terms with about the ACT and SAT. This includes a lot of canceled places, a lot of canceled tests. Sometimes I think we've even seen it be like a day before the test.
Oftentimes without notice. So students log into their account to print their ticket and they realize that they don't have a ticket because their test was canceled. No email, no text, no notification at all.
Right. So keeping an eye on those registration deadlines. This also means that it's going to get more competitive to take these tests. Not the tests are competitive themselves, but to actually just find a seat. Unfortunately, when areas are not allowed to present these tests, students and parents feel the pressure to travel pretty extraordinary distances into other states, or as we talked about, even staying overnight and anywhere from 3 to 8 hour drives to take these tests, which I would say is absolutely not worth it. We talk a lot about how the standardized test is not worth your health. It's not worth going out and doing all of that. Also, frankly, it's getting to the point where now there are so many test optional schools and test blind schools that a test is not even necessary for the college search. You could never pick up an ACT or SAT test. And this is not something for the students out there who are thinking, oh, thank goodness, I'll never have to test again. This is just kind of our advice in general. You could never take a standardized test and you could still have a remarkably robust, balanced college list that could fit just about everything you're looking for. And that's a really exciting thing, I think, in the field right now. We talked about, double checking those testing tickets, making sure that once again, having to be flexible, as frustrating as it might actually be. And also something that is really difficult and also really frustrating with our job, every school is different and not always clear about their test optional policies. We really, really highly recommend that if you are in doubt of a test optional policy, just reach out to the admission counselor, the admission office. Somebody there will have a well-rehearsed, canned answer to explain exactly what their testing policy is. But a great example of this that not a lot of families think about is that there are schools out there that are test optional for admission, but they are not test optional for scholarships. I'll let that sink in really quick, because what that means is that your student can choose to not take a test, get admitted to a college, and then find out that they do not qualify for scholarships because they did not have a test. That is obviously a gross misuse of test optional policy. And many schools have kind of been publicly shamed for this, but still there are quite a few that are out there. So a really simple way to show an admission counselor that you're not fooling around and your stuff is say, okay, so I see you're test optional for admission. Does that also include scholarships? And then kind of grill them a little bit on what that looks like, because we don't want any students paying full price for a college. We don't want any students going down and closing a bunch of doors only to find out that they were misled. So it's really important.
The last thing that I will say, just to, again, emphasize how important it is to keep checking your ACT and SAT accounts. We've had students to find out the day before the exam by logging into their account and getting their ticket that their site has been moved. Often to a different state. We had students in California who suddenly were supposed to take the test in Idaho with so little notice that they could not physically get to Idaho in time, even if they wanted to. It's wild what is happening. We've also had experiences of twins showing up to their testing site, both have the same ticket in hand, for each student, and one of them being told they're actually needing to test at a different site. It's very, very important to arrive early. It's important to have that testing ticket in your hand. And it is very important the week leading up to make sure you know exactly what is happening. It is near impossible to reach anyone at either of these organizations. We have a few contacts at each of them who are oftentimes quite responsive. And during these crazy times, there's no way for them to be responsive. There's so many things that are incredibly frustrating about this process at the current moment because of everything that's going on. So again, if you're ever in a situation where you have questions, please just reach out and we'll do our best to help you navigate all of that.
Right. And I think that's really quickly, I'll go off screen here really quick, or I guess off script, off slide, whatever you want to call it. I do want to say it's very easy to villainize and demonize the people who work at College Board or ACT. And true, they can be frustrating, and some of their policies we generally disagree with. But you have to also remember that things are equally as crazy for them right now. They had what they assumed was going to be a sweet gig that was going to go on forever. And like most people who are experiencing this in the pandemic, a wrench was thrown in their machine. And so a lot of times they are not always in the know. They are overwhelmed. They are understaffed. And so while it is frustrating, and if we're thinking about the macro level, these particular industries can be frustrating, the people who are working there are oftentimes simply overwhelmed and under-resourced, and they are sometimes just as in the dark as we or as families and students are. So important to keep in mind. Now, we always like to put in kind of a catch-all, other things to consider slide at the end where we don't have enough information to maybe do a whole slide on it, or there's so much information we could do a presentation on it, but we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So one of the first things we want to talk about is that schools are doing a mixed job of handling test optional and non-test optional. And so what we mean by that is that ideally we would like to see these schools admitting percentages of test optional students that are somewhat equitable to the amount of test optional applications. Some schools are doing great. Some schools have reserved certain percentages of their class to be test optional. Some schools are committing to the kind of percentage equitable numbers that we like to see. Other schools, like Jess mentioned earlier, might get, several thousand test optional. and they only actually give up maybe 40 to 50 slots for a test optional student. It's hard to know because, once again, are these people applying test optional because they couldn't take the test, or maybe they're great students but not great test takers? Or are they applying test optional because they're not actually that great of students, or it's not a good fit and they can't really compete if they had a normal year? So who's kicking the tires versus who's actually needing these policies? It's hard to know.
We'll reemphasize this. Do not risk your health and safety to take these tests. And I'm talking like if you have a friend who has tested positive for COVID and is still planning to take the test in the same room as you, you do not go, and you try to encourage them not to go either. But you can't control other people. You can absolutely control yourself. There will be a section on your applications where you can indicate why you don't have a test score, if you'd like to, if you were impacted by COVID. And honestly, something like that, being able to make an executive decision that actually puts yourself first, and self-care is very much important these days, that probably reflects very positively on you, more so than a test score where you risk your life. We also recommend that students, I don't think this is on here, that students, when they're practicing, try to practice in the same kind of zone that they'll be in for the actual test, so you can get used to testing for 3.5 hours in a mask and not really being able to drink water without removing the mask, and how comfortable you might be with that and things like that. Also, double check that your calculator meets the requirements, because again, some sections will allow you to use a calculator and you will want to be able to use that calculator. Don't mess that up. Bring a calculator that is on the list and approved.
Right. Next point, if a school insists on you providing a score when you didn't have the opportunity to test safely, is that really a school you want to attend? This is something that Jess and I talk with students about a lot, and I also talked about this at Hendrix. Oftentimes students would have either a major concern or a major disagreement with a school, to which I would usually, try and talk through and see what the root of that is, find the why behind the objection. But oftentimes, not every school is a great fit for every student. And when we think about the fact that you're going to be investing time and money and emotions into these particular aspects, we really want to make sure that students are thinking about, what is the best for the school. If this is how they're going to treat you when things are really hectic and crazy and critical, how are they going to treat you when they don't really have a reason to support you? Something to consider.
Yeah. So there's always the question, will these test optional policies create or eliminate a bias? It's still not entirely clear. It's definitely eliminating some bias, and it's certainly creating some new biases. So we'll see what happens there, but just a note.
And just to really kind of summarize it up, we fully support the implementation of transparent and fair test optional policies. We are student-centered. We believe that colleges should be student-centered, and we encourage and support colleges that have that mentality. If you wasn't obvious enough from our presentation, that's kind of where we stand on the issue, because our concern is advocating for students and families and giving as many opportunities and leveling the playing field as much as possible is in the best interest of all students and families.
And we kind of already touched on the AP test. There will be an online version and an in-person version. And right now, I highly recommend the in-person version if possible.
Right. So we can be a little long-winded at times, so we appreciate you listening to that, and we hope that you found some of this insightful. We really appreciate getting the opportunity to work with College Fit Finder and Jeff to come here and present, to reach out to an audience. You have all of our information here. I know Jeff will be sending out the video via a mailing list. We are also going to send out the slides and the presentation through our own mailing list, so look forward to that. We're going to have everybody just included on the mailing list. The reason being is we like to send out updates and information about all the things going on in the college world. If you don't want those updates, that's totally fine. You can click the unsubscribe button. But otherwise, we think that just having that information and being able to send it to a student or a family or a friend is pretty important. And we're all about giving free content and resources to families and students. So thank you for listening, and hopefully you learned a little something.
And Jeff, there's a question in the chat that you might be able to answer a little bit better than us about NCAA requiring test scores.
Yeah. I
There's been a
saw
lot
that
of flip-flopping back and forth and deleting things.
Yeah, I'm going to answer right now. So when it comes to that, I just sent something in the chat there. There's an article about the NCAA. Right now, they announced that students for 21 and 22 don't require SAT or ACT scores anymore for D1 or D2, but they haven't announced for the following year. So you just have to kind of keep checking by their website or, stay tuned for more announcements. But I put in the chat the article. That way you can go in and actually, see what they said about them not requiring it for D1 or D2 for 2021 and 2022 season. And everyone, we really appreciate everyone being on the call. If you do have any other questions, please type those in and we'll answer any questions you might have. I do see there's another one in here. So if you're going back to showcases, and what if I don't know which coaches showed up to your games? Do you just follow up with the coaches just to make sure that they came to your games or not? So, I mean, worst case scenario, you don't know who came to your games. Yes, follow up with all the coaches that you emailed in the first place, just saying, hey, I wasn't sure if you were able to attend, and then ask for that feedback that I had mentioned. But, the best situation is, talk to your coach or a team manager and just see if someone that is handing out team brochures to coaches can just get a business card or just make a list. Because if I have a list of 20 schools that came to the games and then I send that out to all of the players, now you will be able to follow up and, ask for that feedback. So yes, follow up with everyone if you don't know who came to your games, but find a way, whether it's, having your parents see who those coaches are. They're all going to have their logos on their shirts and, names of their universities. So you're going to be able to see who they are. So I would suggest getting somebody to make that list so that you can follow up. Are there any other questions from anyone? If not, like I mentioned, we will be sending out this recording. Sawyer and Jess, thank you very much. A lot of good information. They will be sending out their slide presentation as well. So everyone will make sure that you have that information. It will probably be like in an hour or so, but I'll make sure I send that out to everyone. And then there's a question for you guys, Jess and Sawyer.
Right,
Yeah.
just saw that. So missed all things. So we're looking at two exactly the same students. So two applicants, same GPA, same soccer, extracurriculars. Will taking the SAT or the SAT with a good high score is advantageous. If we're just looking at those factors, I would say yes. Something that's left out here is things like demonstrate interest. So how much have you shown your investment in a school when we're thinking about admissions? The other thing that's really important are those essays. The writing samples.
What do you mean by that? Can you clarify that, Sawyer? Sawyer,
sure.
Clarify what you just said right there, because I think that's important.
Right. So we'll talk first about that demonstrate interest. And so what does that term mean? Demonstrate interest, something that some students and families might or might not realize is that colleges are actually incredibly sophisticated and pretty high tech when it comes to kind of data analytics and data science. And they are gathering as much information about you as possible. And one of the reasons they do that is because they have to predict who is going to actually come to their school so they can budget for the next year. So when we talk about demonstrate interest, what that means is visiting a school. It means staying the night if we're thinking about traditional college visits. It means reaching out to your admission counselor. If a recruiter or an admission counselor is coming to your school, making sure to go and visit them. Or if you can't visit them because of class, at least like letting them know that you're interested in just stopping by. Filling out information cards, stopping at college fairs. If you have the opportunity for an interview, which not everybody does, but a lot of schools will actually send that out. This is really important for a couple reasons. One, like I said, if you show that you're interested, two students completely the same across every single field, the student that has shown more interest will almost always be selected. So I'll reemphasize that once again. If two students are the exact same, a clone in every way, shape, or form in every part of the admission application, if one has shown significant interest in a college, the college, I would argue, will 100 times out of 100 pick that one that has shown more demonstrated interest, because there is a higher chance that they will deposit and enroll in the school, and there's a higher chance that they will retain at the school and then graduate ideally in 4 years. So that's something really important, and you can actually use this system to your advantage. When you open an email, when you click a link, colleges can see everything you do related to their website. It's a pretty interesting topic. It might be worth a presentation later, but I would say that, oh yeah, there's a blog post on it, hashtag promoting our blog. But that's something important to keep in mind. The other thing that's not in that example is thinking about writing. It does not matter how great your test score is if you do a horrific job with supplemental essays or with your essay. So, why do you want to attend this college? Or tell us something about an obstacle you overcame, or, what does diversity mean to you? All these questions you're going to have to write essays for. Those are actually pretty important, because not only are those ways for us to be able to see what a student is kind of thinking and feeling, but they're also very, very useful to see where is the level of writing and critical thinking and grammar that a student can show us. Are they at the college level with those things? So I would say that demonstrated interest and writing are two pieces missing from that. But if we're just thinking about extracurriculars and GPA, then yeah, if one has a test score that's higher than the other, that would be the safer bet, generally speaking.
We also I should probably emphasize that having just soccer as an extracurricular doesn't necessarily stand out. We want students who are engaged and passionate about something, likely some things, but it's also important to recognize that a lot of students who will be applying will not only play a sport and play it well, but they'll also still have volunteer work and actual work experience, family obligations, hobbies, music. There's so many possibilities for really standing out in that world of extracurriculars that it's really rare for two applicants to actually look identical on paper. To be able to actually answer that question.
But a great question when we think about the theoretical aspect of it.
All right. Well, again, thank you, everyone. Sawyer and Jess, thank you so much. And I'll make sure that we send out the recording and they'll send out their slides. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to us or Jess and Sawyer, and we can all help you. Thank you so much. Have a great night. And thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.